If you're scrolling through social media anytime in August, you start to see something kind of weird. Back to school isn't just one day, it feels like a whole 6 week season. You've got some kids posting their first day of school photos, while other kids are clearly still at the beach. So, what's going on? Why is the American school calendar this wild patchwork quilt? And this quote from the Pew Research Center, man, it just nails that feeling, right? Because think about it. Your own first day of school is so locked in your brain that when you see someone else starting on a totally different date, it just feels wrong. It's the perfect way to show just how local this whole experience really is. And we're not just talking about a few random schools here and there. Get this. By late August, a whopping 70% of all public school students in the US are already back at their desks. So for most kids, summer vacation is long gone before we even get to Labor Day, which is supposed to be the unofficial end of summer. Okay, so take a look at this chart. A super clear pattern just jumps right out at you. Basically, the farther south you go, the earlier school starts. I mean, you've got kids in places like Alabama and Mississippi heading back in early August. But then you look up at New England, and pretty much nobody is starting before the very last week of the month. So the big question is, why? All right, so the answer a lot of us probably heard growing up has something to do with the old agrarian calendar, right? The idea that kids needed the summers off to help out on the farm. Well, it turns out that popular belief is a total myth. Yeah, this slide lays out the actual history, and it's pretty much the opposite of what we thought. Back in the 19th century, rural schools were often open in the summer. They'd take breaks in the spring for planting and the fall for harvesting. And city schools, they were open almost year-round, and kids just came and went whenever their families could spare them. So if it wasn't for farming, how did we end up with the calendar we have today? Well, as this timeline shows, it didn't really take shape until the early 20th century. It was basically a big compromise. You had education reformers pushing for a standard system for everyone. But two other huge things were happening. One, city schools were becoming miserable, sweltering hot boxes without AC. And two, the middle class was growing and they actually started taking summer family vacations. Okay, so that's the history. It explains why we have this long summer break to begin with. But it still doesn't tell us why the start dates are all over the place today. To figure that out, we have to look at how education is actually run here in the United States. And really, it all boils down to the 10th Amendment. See, the U.S. Constitution says that states get to be in charge of public education, not the federal government. So unlike a lot of other countries, we don't have some national ministry of education that just sets one calendar for everybody. And what that means, in practice, is that every decision about the school year, we're talking start dates, end dates, holidays, all of it, is made at the state or even the local level. That decentralization, that right there is the number one reason for the crazy amount of variation we see across the country. So who actually gets to make the final call? Well, it's a mix. You've got about 16 states that set a general window for when schools can start. But a lot of the time, the individual school districts get the final say. And their decisions get influenced by, well, everything. From things like teacher training schedules to, you guessed it, powerful economic interests. And if you want a perfect example of that, just look at Virginia. For years, they had a law, get this, nicknamed the King's Dominion Law after the theme park. It actually forced public schools to start after Labor Day. Why? Because the tourism industry was adamant that an earlier start would kill their revenue and cost kids summer jobs. This wasn't a fight about what's best for students. It was a fight about money. And that really gets to the heart of the conflict here, the one that plays out in state capitals and school board meetings all across the country. It's this constant tug of war between the school calendar, family life, and the local economy. I mean, the tourism industry's whole argument hangs on this one big idea. If you start school after Labor Day, more families will take those late summer trips. But is that actually true? For a long time, that was a really tough question to answer with cold, hard data. Until recently. So a group of researchers at the University of Minnesota's Tourism Center decided they were going to figure this out once and for all. And they did something smart. They didn't just send out surveys asking people what they think they might do. No, they dug into a massive data set that tracks the actual travel patterns of thousands of real families. And the result? It was pretty stunning. The study found that starting school after Labor Day boosts the chances of a family taking a trip in late summer by a full 50%. 50%. That is a huge effect, and it proved the tourism industry wasn't just making things up. And here's how they knew for sure they were right. They ran what's called a placebo test. They looked at households that didn't have any school-aged kids. And for those families, The school start date had absolutely zero effect on their travel plans. That was the proof that the school calendar was the real thing driving the change. But look, this story isn't just about theme parks and beach trips. There's a whole other side to this, as this quote from Joanne Mickens of Parents for Public Schools points out. For a lot of working parents, especially in lower-income families, a long summer break isn't a vacation. It's a huge, stressful scramble for childcare, and it's a serious financial burden. So here we are. We have this traditional school calendar that was basically cobbled together from historical compromises and old social trends. And now it's running head-on into a whole new set of 21st century pressures. There are really three big forces pushing for a change. First up is climate change. I mean, these brutally hot days in August and September could make a long summer break impossible for schools that don't have good AC. Second, you've got academics. People are always debating the summer slide, that learning loss that can happen over a long break, and that's led to more and more calls for year-round school. And finally, there are those family needs we just talked about, that really tough childcare crunch. Now, you hear a lot of talk about year-round school in the news, right? But it's important to put that into perspective. As of 2020, only about 4% of public schools in the US are actually on a year-round calendar. So it's still a tiny minority, but the conversation is definitely getting louder. And all of this leaves us with one big final question. When you think about it, our school calendar is basically a relic, a holdover from the early 20th century. It wasn't designed for our modern world of two-income families, a changing climate, and constant standardized testing. So as our world keeps changing so fast, doesn't it make sense that our school calendar should probably change with it?